Jimmy Thompson had always been an early riser. Well, perhaps early riser wasn't quite the right term, since his work at Crescent Heights corporate complex usually began after most of the building's employees had long gone home. He worked the night shift quiet, solitary, and mostly uneventful. As the janitor of this towering office complex, his job was simple: sweep the floors, take out the trash, scrub the restrooms, and maintain the pristine appearance of the building for the next day's occupants. Jimmy took pride in his work. It was steady and, in his opinion, essential. But tonight would be different. Tonight would change everything. The building had always been a little eerie after hours. Its towering steel and glass structure seemed to take on a life of its own when the lights flickered in the hallways, and the hum of the air conditioning was the only sound breaking the silence. Still, Jimmy had never minded it. In fact, he'd grown accustomed to the quiet, especially after 5 years of working the night shift. However, tonight, a strange unease seemed to hang in the air. As he made his way through the empty lobby, the scent of freshly polished floors and lemon-scented cleaning supplies mixed with the faint odor of stale coffee that lingered in the break room. The elevators were shut down for the night, but the dim glow from the emergency lights cast strange shadows along the walls, making the corridors seem longer, more ominous than usual. Jimmy shook his head, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling that had crept up on him. He grabbed his cleaning supplies and headed to his first stop, the men's restroom on the 3rd floor. As usual, the building was nearly empty, but as Jimmy ascended the stairs toward the 3rd floor, he noticed something odd: a door that had been left ajar. It was a door he knew very well, Office 6B. Normally, it would be locked after hours, as it housed one of the building's top executives, Mr. Lockwood. The door to 6B was always secured tightly at the end of each workday, but tonight it was slightly open. Jimmy's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't imagine why the door would be open at this hour. The offices were meant to be locked up tight, but as he approached, he heard something else, faint sounds coming from inside. It almost sounded like whispering. It was too soft to make out, but it seemed to be calling him in. He hesitated for a moment, then pushed the door open further. The dim glow of a flickering light greeted him, casting long shadows across the room. The office was dark, save for the small light overhead, and the faint smell of mildew lingered in the air. Something was off. The papers on Mr. Lockwood's desk had been hastily scattered, as if someone had left in a hurry. "Hello?" Jimmy called out, stepping cautiously into the room. No response. Just the unsettling silence that seemed to linger in the air like a thick fog. The temperature had dropped too. Jimmy could feel the cold seeping into his bones, a chill that wasn't normal for this time of year. His breath misted in the air. The whispering grew louder, now more distinct, like a voice trying to break through the static. It wasn't just one voice. It was many, muffled, desperate, and almost pleading. He turned quickly toward the corner of the room, where a large window overlooked the city. But as his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he noticed something out of place, a shadow in the far corner of the room. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, but as he squinted, he realized the shadow was moving. Jimmy froze. He had seen the shape shift. He wasn't imagining things. Help me, came the voice again, this time louder, more urgent. The shadow in the corner seemed to elongate, stretching out toward him. It had no discernible shape at first, just a dark mass that grew until it formed into the figure of a woman. She was tall, her form thin and emaciated, her features sharp and gaunt. But it was her eyes that terrified Jimmy, the most hollow black pits of nothingness. She was floating, her feet inches above the floor. Without thinking, Jimmy stumbled backward, knocking into a chair that crashed to the floor with a loud thud. His heart raced as he turned to leave the office, but as soon as his hand reached for the door, it slammed shut with a deafening crack, trapping him inside. The room grew darker still. The shadows seemed to be alive, swirling around him like a storm. He tried the door again, but it wouldn't budge. Panic gripped him. He was trapped in the office with whatever this thing was. "Please, help me," the voice croaked, sounding as if it was coming from all directions at once. The air grew colder, and Jimmy could see his breath, as if he were standing outside in the middle of winter. "Who are you? What do you want?" Jimmy gasped, his voice shaking with fear. The figure floated closer, and Jimmy could now see the details of her face. Pale skin stretched taut over sharp cheekbones, and her hair long and dark, hanging in ragged strands around her face. Her lips parted, revealing teeth that were unnaturally sharp. I was left behind." The voice was broken, trembling with sorrow. "I died here, in this office. They didn't care. They didn't even notice." The woman's form flickered, becoming more transparent, and for a moment, Jimmy thought he could see through her to the wall beyond. His legs were like lead, his body frozen in place by fear. He knew he had to act. The thought of escape was consuming him, but there was nowhere to run. No one would hear him. He glanced toward the janitor's closet, a few doors down the hall. He had an idea there might be something in there to help. But first, he needed to confront whatever this thing was. With a deep breath, Jimmy mustered all the courage he had left and reached for the cleaning supplies cabinet, grabbing the strongest bleach he could find. He didn't know why, but he felt as though this was his only chance to fight back. He threw open the closet door and found, buried under the cleaning cloths, a small, forgotten bundle of sage. He didn't know what it was for, but in his panic, he grabbed it, along with a bottle of holy water that had been sitting untouched in the back of the closet. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. Jimmy dashed back to the office. The woman was still there, floating just inches from the floor, her eyes fixed on him with a terrible intensity. She whispered again, but now the words were clearer. "I will never leave. You cannot banish me." He didn't have time to think about it. Jimmy lit the sage and began chanting the few words he could remember from the old folklore his grandmother had once taught him. He didn't know if it would work. He wasn't even sure what he was doing, but he hoped it was enough. The smell of burning sage filled the room, and the temperature seemed to shift again. "Leave this place," Jimmy shouted, his voice shaking but resolute. He splashed some of the holy water toward the figure, the liquid glinting in the dim light. For a moment, there was nothing. Then the woman screamed an unearthly, chilling sound that seemed to shake the very foundation of the building. The lights flickered violently, and the shadows that had once surrounded her seemed to recoil in fear. She reached for him one last time, but before she could make contact, she was engulfed in a burst of light, and then, as quickly as she had appeared, she was gone. The room returned to normal. The air was still, the temperature returned to its usual warmth, and the shadows receded into the corners of the office. The light above flickered for a moment and then settled into a steady glow. Jimmy stood there, breathless in the silence. He couldn't believe what had just happened. The office felt peaceful now. He wiped the sweat from his brow and slowly backed toward the door, his heart still racing. The next morning, the office was as pristine as always. No one had any idea what had happened, and no one ever spoke of it again. But Jimmy knew. He had saved the office. He had faced something terrifying, something beyond his understanding, and he had emerged victorious. Yet sometimes, late at night, when the building was quiet and the lights flickered in the hallways, Jimmy would hear that voice again. And in those moments, he knew the haunting was over, for now. Conclusion of the story is, as the morning light filtered into the Crescent Heights corporate complex, everything seemed to return to normal. The building buzzed with the usual energy, employees rushing in and out, phones ringing, and the hum of computers filling the air. No one knew about the terrifying encounter that had taken place the night before. No one knew that a janitor, someone who often went unnoticed, just a humble worker in the background, had saved the office from a dark, supernatural force. Jimmy Thompson didn't seek praise or recognition. He never mentioned what had happened to anyone. But as he pushed the mop across the gleaming floors, a quiet smile tugged at the corner of his lips. He knew he had done something important, something that went beyond the routine tasks of sweeping and cleaning. In that moment, he understood the true value of his work, not just as a janitor, but as someone who made a difference when no one else could see it. Janitors like Jimmy are often the unsung heroes of any building. They show up when the world is asleep, taking care of the things that others overlook. They scrub, sweep, and sanitize spaces, often working tirelessly behind the scenes, making sure that everything is in order, that people can feel comfortable in a clean and safe environment. Yet their work is rarely acknowledged, their contributions seldom celebrated. But the story of Jimmy, the janitor who saved the office, is a reminder that heroism doesn't always look like what we expect. Sometimes the most unlikely individuals, those who work quietly and humbly, are the ones who carry the greatest weight. They are the ones who step up in times of need, showing resilience, courage, and strength even when they don't have a spotlight on them. Their value is immeasurable, not just in the work they do, but in the ways they make our lives easier and safer every single day. The lesson here is simple yet profound. Never underestimate the power of kindness, the importance of hard work, and the quiet strength that lies in each and every person. No matter their title or position, we should always remember that even the most invisible among us can be the ones to save the day when the unexpected strikes. And perhaps in doing so, we might take a moment to show more appreciation for those who work in the background, our janitors, our custodians, our silent heroes. The next time you see someone cleaning the halls or emptying the trash, take a moment to thank them. A simple gesture of gratitude can go a long way, because behind every spotless floor, every clean window, and every neatly maintained restroom, there's a person working hard, making our lives better in ways we may never fully realize. And sometimes, like Jimmy, they may just be the ones who save us from the darkness, whether it's a forgotten office, a broken pipe, or even a supernatural force. To all the janitors out there, thank you. You are the quiet, steady force that keeps our world running. And for that, you deserve our deepest respect and gratitude.